Have you ever heard of the process of cutting a diamond? In its raw state, it does not shine, does not impress, and may even look like an ordinary stone, but within it there is something priceless. For its true shine to appear, it needs to go through an intense process of pressure, heat, and precise cuts. Only after all this transformation does it reveal its true beauty and become one of the most precious stones in the world. Now think for a moment. What if your childhood had been exactly like this? What if every difficulty, every feeling of not belonging, and every experience that seemed unfair was actually part of a greater process of refinement, training for something much bigger than you can imagine? Perhaps you have asked yourself, why was my life so different from others? Why did I experience difficulties that others never faced? The answer may lie in something that many ignore. Those chosen for a special purpose never have an ordinary life, and there are clear signs that show this from childhood. Modern psychology studies indicate that children who face challenges early in life develop higher levels of resilience, emotional intelligence, and leadership skills. Source: American Psychological Association. In the Bible, the greatest leaders went through periods of difficulty before fulfilling their missions. Moses, Joseph, David, they all faced trials from their youth. In this itinerary, we will explore 5 signs which may indicate that you have been chosen for a special purpose. And along the way, you'll realize that your journey was never a fluke. God was already preparing you from the beginning. Be part of our spiritual family. Sign up today and comment "I believe" below as a symbol that you accept your role in this great transition. Let your energy be counted among the chosen. The time is now. Have you ever felt like you never quite fit in? From childhood, many chosen ones experience a deep feeling that they are different from others. This could happen in several ways. Perhaps you had a greater sensitivity to notice things that others ignored, or perhaps your ideas and dreams were much greater than the standards around you. Joseph, the young man who would later become governor of Egypt, already showed signs of a special calling as a child. He had prophetic dreams. He saw beyond the present, and this differentiated him from his brothers, Genesis 37:5-10. But instead of being understood, he was ridiculed and rejected. According to research from Harvard Business Review, individuals who feel outside the norm from an early age are more likely to develop creative and innovative skills in adulthood. In other words, the feeling of being different may be an indication that your mind and spirit are being shaped for something beyond the ordinary. If you've always felt like you don't fit in, don't see it as a problem, but as a sign. Ordinary people adapt to the surrounding environment. Chosen people transform this environment. And you? Will you ignore this call or accept that your life has a greater purpose? Since you were little, have you ever had intense dreams that later seemed to come true? Or have you ever felt a strong intuition about something that no one else understood? Some people think this is just a coincidence, but in fact, it could be a clear sign that God was already communicating with you from an early age. The prophet Samuel began to hear the voice of God when he was still a boy. 1 Samuel 3:1-10. At first, he thought it was just his mentor Eli calling him. But after hearing the voice repeatedly, he realized it was something much bigger. God was already calling him before he even understood. A study published in Psychology Today indicates that our brain processes unconscious information during sleep, leading to perceptions that can seem like premonitions. But in the spiritual context, many of these perceptions are divine directions. If you've ever had dreams that seemed prophetic or strong intuitions that guided you through difficult times, start paying attention to them. God may be showing you signs, even when you don't realize it. If these signs resonate with you, it's no coincidence. Your childhood may have been a training ground for something bigger, and there are even more signs that show how God was already acting in your life from an early age. In the next segments, we will explore more deeply how to recognize this calling and what to do with this information, because knowing you've been chosen is just the first step. The real challenge is deciding what to do with this knowledge. Your journey is just beginning. It's time to regain your strength and build a new path. Subscribe to the channel and be part of this community that is awakening to the truth. Sign 1. Divine calling and life purpose. Have you ever wondered if your life has a greater purpose? If everything that has happened so far, the difficulties, the unusual experiences, and even the moments of loneliness, was part of a carefully laid out plan? The truth is that nothing in the life of a chosen one happens by chance. According to the book of Jeremiah 1:5, God said, "Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you, and before you came out of the womb, I sanctified you and ordained you a prophet to the nations." This means that long before we were born, there was already a divine purpose prepared for us. During the Old Testament period, being chosen by God often meant going through a long process of preparation. Prophets like Moses and Jeremiah faced years of hardship before they fully understood their callings. Moses, for example, lived 40 years in the desert before being called by God to free the Hebrews from slavery in Egypt, Exodus 3:1-12. This pattern is repeated throughout biblical history. Before the mission, there is always a period of learning and maturation. From an early age, some people demonstrate characteristics that indicate a special calling. Perhaps you felt a deep spiritual connection, a different sensitivity to perceive what others did not see, or a strong intuition about your future. But how to recognize these signs? Research from Stanford University indicates that children with a strong sense of purpose from an early age tend to develop greater resilience and a natural desire to lead and impact other lives. Many of these children report experiences that shape their worldview in unique ways. Jose had prophetic dreams when he was still young, Genesis 37:5-11. He didn't fully understand what they meant, but God was already preparing his heart for something great. Years later, these dreams came true when he was appointed governor of Egypt. Think about your childhood. Were there times when you felt you were different from others? Did you notice signs that seemed to indicate your life would take an unusual path? These experiences may not have been random, but rather divine directions. Nothing is by chance. Your purpose is already written. Your life seems to have followed an unusual path. It is possible that God has something special in store for you, but recognizing this is just the first step. The greatest spiritual leaders face challenges before fulfilling their calling. The secret is to trust that each experience is part of God's plan. Sign 2: overcoming difficulties as preparation. Since ancient times, those chosen for great missions have gone through periods of difficulty before understanding their purpose. Often the challenges we face in childhood are not mere obstacles, but rather training for something much greater. Suffering, when seen from a new perspective, can be the tool that shapes character and strengthens faith. Studies from Harvard University show that individuals who face difficulties in childhood develop greater resilience, becoming more prepared to deal with adversity in adulthood. In the spiritual sphere, this translates into a more unshakable faith and the ability to see purpose in trials. The path of the chosen. From a young age, Joseph faced rejection from his own brothers, being sold into slavery and then unfairly imprisoned in Egypt. Genesis 37:23-28. For years, it seemed like his life had no direction, but God used each experience to prepare him to rule and save his people from famine. Born into a period of oppression, Moses was separated from his family as a baby and raised in Pharaoh's house. Exodus 2:1-10. Later, when defending a Hebrew, he had to flee to the desert, where he spent 40 years before receiving his divine mission. The time of isolation prepared him to be a leader and liberator of Israel. From an early age, Samuel served in the temple under the guidance of the priest Eli, 1 Samuel 3:1-10. Amid a corrupt environment, he maintained his faith and obedience, being chosen by God to be one of Israel's greatest prophets. In the ancient world, the formation of leaders did not happen overnight. Men like Moses and Joseph spent years being molded before they fulfilled their calling. This shows that the waiting time is not a punishment, but a polishing process. The role of resilience in the spiritual journey. Resilience is essential for those who are called to something greater. It doesn't just mean enduring difficulties, but learning from them and becoming stronger. Each trial faced in childhood may have been a preparation for the challenges that would come in the future. According to the American Psychological Association, resilient individuals not only overcome adversity, but also transform these experiences into learning and growth. In a spiritual context, this means that the difficulties were not in vain. They shaped the character necessary to fulfill a divine purpose. If you faced difficult times as a child, stop and think, what did these experiences teach you? What forces emerged from these struggles? Maybe your life is being shaped for something you can't yet see. Each challenge has a purpose. Nothing you went through was by chance. Every pain, every moment of uncertainty, and every obstacle could have been part of your preparation for something greater. God does not waste suffering. He transforms each experience into a step towards your growth. Share this knowledge with the world. Together, we can spread this message and help more people become free. Subscribe to the channel and send this video to anyone who needs to hear this truth. Sign 3. Resilience and spiritual growth. Throughout life, we face challenges that test our faith and determination. The path of the chosen is never easy, but each trial has a greater purpose. Resilience is not just an emotional or psychological trait, but an essential component in the spiritual formation of those who have been called by God. Research from the University of Oxford indicates that individuals who overcome difficulties from an early age develop greater emotional intelligence and a deeper perception of life. In a spiritual context, this means that those who face trials are shaped for a higher purpose. The process of forging the chosen. Moses spent years in the desert before becoming Israel's liberator. During this period, he learned to depend on God, developing the patience and wisdom necessary to lead an entire people. Exodus 3:1-12. Before he was king, David faced rejection and persecution. For years, he was hunted by Saul and needed to learn to trust God to survive. Each hardship prepared his heart to rule with righteousness and faith. 1 Samuel 16:11-13. Paul endured arrests, persecutions, and shipwrecks, but he remained steadfast. His letters to the church show how hardship strengthened his mission and expanded the gospel. 2 Corinthians 11:23-27. Romans 5:3-4 states, "We glory in tribulations, knowing that tribulation produces perseverance, perseverance, experience, and experience, hope." This proves that suffering is not the end, but the beginning of a spiritual transformation. Those who are called by God need to develop spiritual endurance. Just as an athlete trains tirelessly before a big competition, those chosen face trials that strengthen their faith. According to the American Psychological Association, resilience is not just the ability to recover, but the ability to grow and become stronger after adversity. The struggles you faced were not in vain. Each difficulty helped build your faith and prepared you for something great. Life's challenges are not obstacles for those who trust in God. They are stepping stones that elevate your faith to a new level. Suffering does not destroy the chosen ones, it strengthens them to fulfill their purpose. Sign 4. Faith and trust in God's time. We often wish that God's plans would be fulfilled immediately, but the reality is that everything happens at the right time. Divine time does not follow our clock, and this wait can seem long and challenging. However, it is precisely during this period of preparation that God shapes our character and strengthens us for the mission that awaits us. Studies on human development show that patience is directly linked to long-term success. People who learn to trust the process become more resilient and confident in their choices. In the spiritual context, this translates into unshakable faith and the certainty that God acts at the right time, the chosen and the waiting time. Sold into slavery and unjustly imprisoned, Joseph spent years hoping for a greater purpose. Only when he interpreted Pharaoh's dreams and saved Egypt from famine did he understand why God allowed so many trials. Genesis 41:43. Moses, after fleeing Egypt, spent 4 decades in the desert before being called by God to free the Hebrew people. This time of isolation was essential to prepare him for his mission. Exodus 3:1-12. God promised that Abraham would have numerous descendants, but the fulfillment of this promise took years. He needed to learn to trust and wait, even when everything seemed impossible. Genesis 21:1-3. Ecclesiastes 3:1 reminds us, "Everything has its season, and there is a time for every purpose under heaven." When we learn to trust this principle, we let go of anxiety and embrace God's process. Waiting as part of the journey. The waiting period is not wasted time. It is in this interval that God works in our hearts, teaches valuable lessons, and strengthens us for what is to come. The apparent delay is, in fact, a preparation for something much bigger. According to studies from Stanford University, people who learn to delay immediate gratification develop greater self-control and emotional intelligence. In the spiritual realm, this means learning to trust in God's will without rushing into it. If you feel like your promise is taking time to fulfill, remember that every second is shaping you into something greater. God's timing never fails. Trust and stand firm. God's plan for your life is already laid out. Your only task is to trust, keep walking, and remain faithful to the calling. When the right moment comes, everything will make sense. To not miss any message from God, click the subscribe button, write "I'm ready" in the comments, and start aligning your energy with the transformation that is coming. Sign 5. Identity and singularity of the chosen. From an early age, some people realize that they do not completely fit into the world around them. While other children follow common patterns, some demonstrate a different sensitivity, a unique way of seeing life, and a deep desire for something greater. This feeling of not belonging can be a strong indication that God has separated them for a special mission. Research carried out by the University of Cambridge indicates that children who feel different from the group tend to develop greater creativity and critical thinking, essential characteristics for leadership and innovation. In a spiritual context, this could mean that God is preparing these people for specific roles in His plan. The feeling of being different as a sign. When God called Jeremiah to be a prophet, he felt inadequate and claimed he was just a child. Jeremiah 1:6-7. However, God had already determined his purpose before he was even born. Gideon also did not see himself as someone special. He believed he was the smallest in his house and that his family was the most insignificant in Israel. However, God chose him to deliver his people. Judges 6:15-16. Before he was king, David was just a young sheepherder. While his brothers were considered strong and prepared for war, he was underestimated. However, it was his uniqueness that made him the perfect choice to reign over Israel. 1 Samuel 16:11-13. Many successful leaders, artists, and entrepreneurs report that as a child, They felt like they didn't belong in the environment in which they grew up. This motivated them to seek a greater purpose, something that resonated with their deepest aspirations. Gifts and talents, the reflection of the divine calling. If you have natural abilities that stand out, this can be a strong indication of the purpose God has designed for you, whether it's a talent for communication, leadership, art, or service. Each gift is an important piece in the divine plan. 1 Peter 4:10 teaches us, each one should exercise the gift he has received to serve others, faithfully administering the grace of God in its various forms. This means that our talents were not given just for our own benefit, but to impact lives. Have you ever noticed that some skills seem natural to you? It may be God's way of showing you the path to your calling, embracing your uniqueness. Being different is not a mistake, but a characteristic of the chosen ones. Instead of fighting this feeling of not belonging, accept that God shaped you for something greater. The moment of decision. Now that you know the signs that indicate a special calling from childhood, the final question is, what will you do with this information? God doesn't call anyone by chance, and every experience you've had so far has had a purpose. Nothing was wasted. Every challenge, every feeling of being out of place, every gift you carry is part of something much bigger. Studies show that people who find a clear purpose in life have higher levels of personal fulfillment and well-being. In the spiritual context, this means living according to what God has planned for you, without doubts or fears. Choose to respond to the call or ignore it. Jonah tried to escape his calling, but he was unable to escape God's plan for his life. After facing difficulties, he understood that the only way out was to obey and fulfill his mission. Jonah 1:1-17. Moses hesitated and tried to refuse the call, claiming it was not eloquent enough. Exodus 4:10. Yet God empowered him to free an entire people from slavery. When Mary received the announcement that she would give birth to Jesus, she could have doubted or resisted. But she chose to trust the divine plan and said, "Behold, I am the handmaid of the Lord. Let it be unto me according to your word." Luke 1:38. You have the choice to accept or ignore what God has for your life. But those who say yes to the divine calling experience a transformation that changes everything around them. What to do now? Now that you understand the signs and know that God has a plan for you, it's time to act. Don't wait any longer. The right time will never be perfect in human eyes, but God already has everything prepared. To follow your purpose, pray and ask God for direction. Use the talents He has given you to impact the world. Surround yourself with people who strengthen your faith. Stop seeking validation from others and trust the divine plan. Each one has a mission. Now it's up to you to decide if you're ready to live it. The answer you were looking for is here. If this video made sense to you, don't stop here. There is so much more to learn and grow. Click sign up now and discover the next step towards your transformation.